Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to convene the Board of County Commissioners Workshop meeting. It's July 19th. Okay. Can we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Bernard,
Here.
Commissioner Kerner,
Here.
Commissioner Marino, Commissioner McKinley,
Here.
Commissioner Sachs, Mayor Weinroth,
Here.
Vice Mayor Weiss.
Here.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor, do we have someone to do the invocation this morning? We do. Commissioner McKinley, would you please do the honors? Everybody please rise.
Thank you. Good morning. May we approach today's business as task of faith to do our best within our power to provide positive leadership on behalf of our community and those who live and work here, and that our decisions meet the standards of divine compassion for all. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner McKinley. All right, so we are going to accept public comment today. So if you do have cause to want to speak to us on tax exemptions or code enforcement or extraordinary circumstances relating to impact fees, please fill out a card, and when we get to that item, we'll be sure to call on you. And so I'm going to ask our staff to begin with historic tax exemptions. Oh, I'm sorry, we do have a regular agenda item. Our good friends at the Clerk and Controller would like us to do a couple of items for me.
Motion to move the agenda is adopted.
Okay, item 3A, 1 and 2 has been moved by Commissioner Kerner, seconded by the Vice Mayor.
2A, additions, deletions, and substitutions.
Oh,
So if there's
Madam,
No, there are no additions, deletions, or substitutions.
can I have a motion to adopt?
So moved.
I have a motion to adopt by, we're going to get this right. Commissioner Kerner. I'm going to give it seconded to Commissioner McKinley. All in favor, all opposed. Show it as approved, 6-0. Now we will move on to item 3A, 1 and 2. Do I have a motion? I have a motion by Commissioner Kerner, second by the Vice Mayor. All in favor, all opposed, 6-0. Now we move on to this very exciting subject of historic tax exemptions. Mr. Rutter.
Mayor, Commissioners, good morning. This follows board direction. I believe we had a number of these exemptions before the board a month or two ago, and the board wanted opportunity to discuss this a little more openly. We wanted an opportunity as well to present to you the history of them, where they came from, some of the fiscal side of it, and put all that before you and take any direction you might have. Brian will present it, but I did want to introduce, I don't know if all of you had the opportunity to meet or interact with Chris Davenport, our Historic Resource Officer. Chris has been with the county for 16 years. He's dressed up and clean today. Usually he's out digging holes out in the field. So we got him in the air conditioning today, and we've got a suit and tie on him. So we got him out of his element to a degree. But Chris is a great asset to the county, works with a number of our departments on historic preservation issues, been with us for a long time, intimately familiar with all measures of law at federal, state level as it relates to historic resources. So Brian will do the presentation, but you have us here available for any questions.
All right, thank you.
Good morning, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Commissioners, County Administrator, members of the public who decided to come learn more about historic preservation and our tax exemption programs. Just very briefly, I'm going to go through sort of three phases. I need to teach you a little bit about historic preservation so you'll understand the nuances of some of the terminology that are involved. Then we'll look at the tax exemption program itself. And then we'll look back at the past 10 years worth of tax exemptions that the board has done, because we've got very good data on that, and we've done an analysis on that as part of your backup. So into the basics. Usually when we talk about historic preservation, a lot of people approach it for any number of reasons. There's sort of cultural values, there's a sense of timelessness, there's an aesthetic appreciation, there's a sense of education, and they're all valid reasons. This is actually a chart that is one of the few instances where people have tried to look, at the general public and say, why do we and why do you value historic preservation? And the idea is to try and understand, and really, we all find different values for different reasons. I'm not going to go through all of it, but some of the highlights are there's sort of the scenic aesthetic value to it that 17% looked at. 14% said it was for education, 24% said it was a legacy for the future that we were passing on. So historic preservation gets to a lot of sort of our long-term values, and it's something that we as custodians of the past at the present are looking to transfer to future generations. And so there's a lot of other things in here. There's a lot of economic reasons, there's tourism, there's any number of reasons. They're all caught up, and it's a very comprehensive field as to why we look at historic preservation. But I want to focus on the economic values because this is something the field has long sought to encapsulate and to understand. We understand that there is a human value, a human capital in having tangible links to our past of physical structures, whether it's for aesthetic reasons, for cultural reasons, or because simply something important happened there. But the economic side is often the side that is the one that will ring true for a lot of people. And it's something that preservation has sort of wandered into and wandered out of over the years where they have looked to quantify these terms. The most recent one done on a statewide basis was 12 years ago. The University of Florida and Rutgers University came through, did this, and they found that historic rehabilitation, which is what we're going to ultimately be talking about, produced annually $2.03 billion worth of value overall for the state of Florida. We, being one of the largest counties, certainly capture that. But they also found that it created jobs, that it contributed to local tax collections. Even though we're going to talk about an exemption, it ultimately improves the value, and it improves property values, not just to those that are the historically designated resource, but those that are in the same area. So rehabilitation in Florida, it was a $13.5 billion annual thing, using 2010 numbers, but over $2 billion was spent on rehabilitation itself. And when they broke that down, $800 million in 2010 was to residential, and $1.2 billion was for non-residential. They also looked at heritage tourism. A little over $4 billion was spent in Florida in 2007, which is the last time they had good data on this, and this is actually a fairly hard data point to pull out, particularly at a state level. It's just the numbers are hard to run, and then the studies aren't done that often. And then almost half of all visitors, American visitors to Florida, found that they came and visited at least one historic site somewhere in the state of Florida. So heritage tourism, which is what we call traveling to a place to see some notion of its past, is nearly 1 out of 2 trips in Florida that we get. So that there is some level of historic value there. And then also in 2010, they found that historic designations do not depress property values. That has been a consistent finding over time. And so with that, I'm going to turn to historic preservation practice in America, and I'm going to give you a very brief legislative history, but it is one that is critically important because that's where the historic tax exemption program slots in on this. American preservation practice is the top-down approach. The practice or the policy, if you will, is set at a federal level, and it has 2 aspects. It has a regulatory one. That is where the government action itself must consider the impacts and effects to historic resources, also archaeological resources, and it must minimize the extent of the undertaking on that resource. And then the other side is incentive-based, which is where the tax exemptions fall into. And that is where the private sector is encouraged through a monetary inducement to pursue historic preservation. And it's an economic incentive, and the way that it works largely, and I'm going to continue to hit on this theme, is that you improve a historically designated structure, so something that's already designated historic. You would come through, you would agree to make renovations to a certain standard. This is the owner agreeing to do it. You go to the government, you ask to do it the certain way, you comply with that. In return for fulfilling all the requirements of doing it a certain way to a certain standard, the government then agrees to whatever the portion of taxes to the historic resource is. That increment of improvement does not go on the taxes. It's held off for 10 years. It's abated for 10 years. So that whatever the value was the year you did the improvement, it's still the value it's taxed at for 10 years. After 10 years, it goes to the new valuation. So that's the basic intent of it. Just real quickly, if you're wondering where the federal side of it is, because I certainly suggested that the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966, this, as it's been amended over the years, has completely set up and establish America's federal policy. And it's a federal, guidance thing. It sets up federal to state, federal to tribes, and then delegates most of the responsibilities down to the state level. And then through another program that's known as a certified local government, it then goes from state to local involvement. We are a certified local government, one of over 60 in the state of Florida that is a certified local government. So we have local historic preservation controls. I'm not going to go through all the things on here, but the state level, we have a state historic preservation office. There's one in all 50 states. There's also tribal offices. We work closely with Tallahassee. That's the Division of Historic Resources in the Department of State. That is who we work through. And the criteria that we use is the National Register criteria, the National Register of Historic Places, which actually goes way back before the National Historic Preservation Act, but it found a purpose under the National Historic Preservation Act. And so just the other side that we're not going to talk much of, the federal agencies, the state agencies and so forth must take responsible stewardship of their resources. They have to consider their impacts. Very quickly, I've already alluded to this, the National Register. You could be significant at multiple levels. You could be significant for something important happened there, something aesthetically valuable is there, it's a good style of building or whatnot. Certain people could have lived there, certain life groups, or also for archaeological reasons. And then it can be federally important, like national importance, like a battlefield or somebody that you've actually studied in an American history book lived there, or something occurred there. Or it could be at a local level. It could be somebody who's locally significant, a famous doctor or something who lived and made a difference in everyday life. They can be an individually listed resource, they can be a district. And simply by being eligible for the National Register, not necessarily listed, because that's a whole level of order of more work, you can also enjoy many of those benefits of being listed, which is largely federal consideration and state and local consideration for planning purposes on your project. So real quickly, federal incentives, those are the federal regulations. The federal incentives, there is a historic preservation fund. This has existed since the beginning of the act, and it's an appropriation by Congress every year. They've been going down over the years, but it's still there. That is to help general preservation programs. It's allocated to 50 states. Community development block grants have been around since 1976. These are to encourage local rehabilitation of specific historic buildings. Again, not what we use. And then finally, there is a federal historic tax credit program, not the one we're talking about, but it's a separate federal program that actually gives for income producing properties, in other words, some sort of non-residential property, and it helps provide a return on investment. That is a very successful program and has given a lot of money back. There's lots of studies on that one. Florida laws. Florida has the Historical Resources Act, Chapter 267 of the statutes, very much mimics and emulates the Federal Historic Preservation Act, gives the Florida basis for all of this. Comprehensive plan, state comprehensive plan, there are two goals in that. One is tourism, the other is cultural and historic resources, and an acknowledgement of historic resources. The Community Planning Act also has us identify historic resources, archaeological resources. They must be considered in land use, zoning plans, and so forth. And then finally, the Florida Building Code has special exemptions because historic buildings are not built the way current buildings are. And if you build them to current building standards or have to renovate to current building standards, you will often lose the integrity of a resource, which is very critical. So there are exceptions made to help keep what makes a historic building significant, keeps it looking and appearing historic. There are obviously life safety things that still have to be done, but there are exemptions on things like the building code for historic structures. Switching over from the state regulatory to the state incentives, certified local government, which we have designated. We have been since the early 90s. The program's been around since 1980. And it simply, it allows the state to delegate the local authority to the local government to make its decisions, to participate in, and so forth. Like I said, we are a designated one. There is also a historic preservation fund. This is for grant fundings from the state. Occasionally we can do those. Sometimes Parks and Rec will go after those for some of its historic resources, so we do participate in those. Main Street program, not something really of relevance to the county, but it is a program to help restore and renovate sort of old-timey downtown areas. If you think of Central Florida, places like Micanopy, Archer, they've all made use of those kinds of programs and so forth. And then finally, the ad valorem tax relief, which is what we're here to talk about. It allows for local governments to offer the property tax abatement to property owners individually listed or locally designated historic districts for rehabilitation efforts on historic portions of their property. That's in Chapter 196.1997 of the statutes. It was actually created by a constitutional amendment back in 1992. It was passed by more than 2/3 of the voters, about a 70-30 vote, and then this went into, and it went on the books. County regulations. Obviously, if it's set up in the statutes, the comprehensive plan, we reference historic resources in the land use, housing, and coastal management elements. We also have a historic preservation element, which is optional, but we've had since 1989 to fulfill the requirements for the future land uses and so forth. And then obviously, for regulatory, we have the Land Development Code. There is Article 9, which has the certificate to dig protection for archaeological resources, and then a certificate of appropriateness for historically designated resources in the county, of which there are 9. Well, actually, there's 8, but we actually designated the Du Bois Park Historic District in 2 different pieces, so there's technically 9. We did one part with the house, we did the other part that's on the other side, but there's really 8 individual resources. And if you look at these, virtually all of them, except for one, are county-owned. They're either in a natural area or they're county resources in parks or whatnot. So we have one private residence, which is why this board has never seen a county tax exemption for an unincorporated parcel. We have one, they've chosen not to use it. So that's why they've always come from municipalities. And then the tax exemption program itself. I already told you about the amendment. So in 1995, the county passed an ordinance, Ordinance 9541, which was the tax exemption for historic properties. So not more than 3 years after the amendment went through, it became statute. And it's for the restoration, renovation, or rehabilitation of a historically designated resource. And the exemption applies to 100% of the assessed value of all improvements to the historic property resulting from improvements to the historic pieces. That's language lifted directly out of the ordinance. It runs for a period of 10 years. They have to record a restrictive covenant. They are required to maintain the character and improvements. And it's also transferable to a new owner. Continuing on, to be eligible, you must either be individually listed in the National Register, part of a National Register district, or designated as a historic property by the certified local government. Those municipalities which have signed an interlocal agreement with the county may also participate and get the county portion of the abatement. Otherwise, they only get the city portion. So this is a 2-level of government process. Those local governments that have the corresponding county discount or county abatement are the town of Palm Beach, West Palm Beach, Lake Worth, Delray Beach, Lake Park, Boynton, and Jupiter. Those that are in Boulder on the list are the ones we've actually seen exemptions from. Lake Park, Jupiter, and Boynton Beach have not yet submitted tax exemptions to us. And I want to emphasize, under the ordinance, the approval of an individual tax exemption is discretionary at the hands of the board. They do not have to approve them. However, the board has always elected to approve individual tax exemptions. Now, how does this process work? This is an owner-instituted practice. Everything that's in green, and this is a 2-page slide, everything that's in green is a county step. Everything that's in orange is a municipal step. So the municipal local government does most of the work on these. An owner would submit an application for the changes, and as part of that, they would actually ask for the ad valorem tax exemption and a pre-construction application. The second step would be the municipal preservation board would then approve it. They would then go as the third step and actually perform the work. As the fourth step, they would then submit the documentation back to the municipality. It says, we did all the work we elected to do. We've done the restoration in a certain way, the way we agreed to. It met the standards that are established out there. And they also submit a municipal tax covenant saying, we agree to abide by all the rules. The city, it goes to the local, they do that. It goes to the local commission, the city commission. They then approve the work by resolution, and it provides the municipal level of the tax exemption. They then record it in the covenant and the records. Then it finally comes to the county. They transmit all of that information to the county, and then it enters the county's process. So at step 8, the county, which is PZB and the county attorney's office, we review the documents, And then we prepare an agenda item for you all. That's where you all saw this back in May. For all of the ones, we typically group them together and we bring them through. We have no say, no review in other than are they a complete application. That's what the original 1995 ordinance set up, is a process by which all the authority is delegated to the municipality for compliance with all the requirements. We have the option of also granting it based on the delegation of authority to them. We don't review, we don't say, we don't have anything to do with that. That's just the way that the program has been set up. Then it comes to you all as the county commission to approve the exemption for the county portion of the taxes. They've already received the municipal portion. There is a separate covenant that goes along with it. That's part of the action. Then after that is approved, it goes back. The owner then gives the resolution, the tax covenant records it in the county records, and then we make sure that the property appraiser gets the final thing. And that's the end of the process as far as a tax exemption works. So when you are seeing agenda items, they've often been in this process for a number of years, sometimes initially seeking a designation, then doing the restoration work, getting the municipal exemption, and then our exemption. So finally, numbers. The past 10 years, the current ones that are on the books, there are 97 tax exemptions in all that we have processed from the municipalities. 29 for Delray Beach, 7 for Lake Worth Beach, 26 for Palm Beach, and 35 for West Palm Beach. The numbers go up and down by year. Some years we get just a few. Some municipalities don't submit any. Delray Beach, West Palm, and Palm Beach tend to be the more reliable ones, often 2, 3, 4 a year, particularly, and they're almost predominantly residential, which I'll go into in a minute. I'm happy to go back and look at the numbers, but looking at numbers are numbers, and you can find a lot of different things. But I did want to break out the residential. Overwhelmingly, of our 97 exemptions over the past 10 years, 79 were residential properties. Almost all of them were single-family detached residences. 73 of the 79. So 6 in all were not. So they're townhouse, multifamily, or some sort of condo. And then because it's almost impossible to try and break out 97, I simply did an average. So Delray Beach has given 28 total exemptions over that 10-year period. And the average annual exemption is a little over $2,500. Lake Worth Beach, 6 in all. Under $1,000 is the annual exemption. Town of Palm Beach has processed 13 for 16.2, or 16,200 is the annual. And then the West Palm Beach, a little under 4 with 32 in all. So that's the residential. I want to highlight one because I think this is a particular interest, because I think this is what everyone thinks of, the real benefit of historic tax exemptions, and it's really an exception rather than the rule, but this is really what everyone, I think, thinks of big picture when they think of tax exemptions. It's a local example, just a few blocks south, 326 Fern Street. It was built in the 1920s as a commercial telephone exchange building. This was the building where people literally sat and plugged and unplugged, the switchboards and so forth. They also, behind it, later built a much less appealing gray edifice that's in every downtown area that was the mechanical or mechanized switchboard. But they took the older one and they renovated it. So it went from being a commercial functional building to a commercial office, and then it got renovated by an architect out of Tampa, Stephanie Farrell and Associates. And it was what they call an adaptive use project, and it was turned in from a commercial building into a residential building with about 85 or so apartments in it of various sizes, loft, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom. And just to give you a sense of the process, West Palm Beach designated as a local resource in 2008, long before it came in for the process of doing the renovation. In 2013, they approved the rehabilitation plans for the building that actually started that. In 2015, the city approved the municipal exemption, and in 2016, the county commission approved the county's tax exemption. So they spent 8 years in process to ultimately get to where they realized all of the things. But it has become a very successful project. There was a lot of other stuff I'm not going to get involved in. But this is really an example of what the tax exemption program can be, because it's also looking at housing. It's looking at restoring old functional or old uses to functional uses and renewing them in the city without losing a sense of place. It's also become a great sense of public art, which is a complete bonus. If you're familiar with the east side, there's murals on it. So then switching to non-residential. Non-residential is a little bit more interesting. 18 in all, but you will see that there's only a few here on this list. They're all 18 are on here. Lake Worth Beach had one. It was a very small project on Lucerne, but a very interesting project. Took a relatively dilapidated building and gave it a completely new life. Delray Beach had their project on 6th Avenue. West Palm Beach had three, one on 6th, one on Olive, and one on Datura. Their annual exemptions are all on there, but we typically see maybe one or so a year on average across the entire county that's a non-residential. And then we have Palm Beach. There are 26 in all in Palm Beach of tax exemptions, so half residential, half non-residential. They are from 4 properties total. 235 Sunrise, which is the Palm Beach Hotel. That was done in 2015. It's almost off the books, if you will. 280 Sunset, which is the Bradley Park Hotel, or now if you've driven by it, it's now the White Elephant. That was a recent one. That was an all-in-one shot, a little boutique hotel that went through a $26 million restoration. It came through. It was on this past year's exemptions, and $93,000 per year for that one. And then we have 2 repeat ones that, due to their size, I think is one reason they come through frequently. One is the Everglades Club, which has been through 6 times at $45,000 is sort of their current exemption. And then the Breakers has come through 5 times. And with larger structures, you tend to see that they have much more systems. They're much more complicated. And generally, it's interesting, I think, with the exception of the Everglades Club, is that all of these are residential or hotel buildings in emphasis. Some people may actually live in them. But that's what we see on Palm Beach. And so these larger structures tend to require more comprehensive renovations. Now, again, very interesting compared to the lofts at Fern Street, but that's where they are. So as a whole, the preservation program of the past 10 years, we have a little over $81 million invested in renovations, and $68 million of that went to the historic portion. So that's the piece that is getting the tax exemptions. The cumulative effect is a little over $3.2 million is the overall tax exemption over the 10 years. And I did want to point this out because we recently learned this is the city of Miami Beach actually eliminated commercial historic tax exemptions. Because if you're familiar with Miami Beach, virtually everything there now is a commercial use, and so they found that the program was getting abused, is the way that I have heard it explained by several, and so they decided to eliminate, to focus on getting more residential. So that's something that's of interest to this. And then if you want, I can go through the Everglades Club and the Breakers, that they went through multiple exemptions, multiple years, and all to the Everglades Club. There were a running series that included kitchen renovations, tower foundations, doors, re-roofing, receiving areas, and ceilings. It's a very complex structure. It's designed by Addison Meisner, who probably rings a bell with all of you at some level because we hear that name repeatedly, particularly if we're involved with Palm Beach or Boca. The noted architect who did a lot there. This was one of his early signature buildings. This is also, I believe, a National Historic Landmark. But in all, it's been almost 13 million in improvements, almost 10 million to historic, and cumulatively, all of those exemptions have resulted in almost $460,000 in tax exemptions. And then we have the Breakers, 1 South County Road, built in 1926, not the first Breakers, but the Breakers that survived. It has 5 exemptions, almost 31 million in improvements, 29.2 in historic improvements, and the cumulative balance on that is almost 1.4 million in tax exemptions. And the improvements are largely things we would understand: balcony replacement and repair, expansion of service areas. They had to actually take out a smokestack demolition. They had an old style generator somewhere that, it's almost like somebody was shoveling coal in it. That was the kind of thing that they took out, but to make it more safe. And then window replacements. Those kinds of things that you have to do on a structure with over 500 windows, you ultimately go through and do those. Those are ongoing repair and replacements. And so that's that. And so we were asked to come back with potentially some options for your consideration, and these are from sort of least to the more drastic, if you will. And the first one is simply a reminder that the board has full discretion in considering the historic tax exemption processing. You have the ability to approve, deny. It's just something that's never been brought up nor done. If there is a desire to visit the program at a larger basis, we can look at establishing criteria for future consideration on county approvals for tax exemptions. It's something that's not really been done, but we think the world is probably moving in that direction. We've also seen, as we've seen, there's a huge breakdown versus residential and non-residential. Lots of smaller non-residential one-off renovations. Every single one of those residential, it's usually a one-time only. They do the whole thing, and that's what they need. The scale of a restoration or rehabilitation of a single-family detached house is completely different than, you know, multi-thousand square foot breakers or even a much smaller version like at the Bradley Park Hotel. And then finally, there's the option to look at, you don't have to give the full reduction for the historic renovation. That increment, it could be reduced, you know, 80%, 70%, whatever the desired amount is. We don't recommend that because we think this is a huge incentive for virtually no action. You know, it's completely owner-driven. They agree to comply with all of this. And if you're going to do that, we certainly would recommend that we put it out there for consideration because there are renovations that are underway right now that are for future years, and that those people should be put on notice as part of the process. And we certainly will entertain other direction, but with that, I will conclude and be happy to answer any questions. I believe we have a couple people here that would like to speak on behalf of their entities. With that.
Thank you very much. Just to clarify, these exemptions roll off after 10 years automatically?
Yes.
Okay, so that this is not for the life of the building. I was also struck by the fact that Boca Raton is not one of the communities that has an interlocal agreement, whereas they do have a historical district.
Yes.
And obviously, they have the hotel down there, the Boca Raton. They have that wonderful bridge that we always talk about, the Camino Bridge, and we have the Pearl City, which is the oldest community in Boca Raton. How come, is that just because they have not voluntarily entered into the agreement?
Yes, well, they have not voluntarily. I've been with the county almost 19 years. That has been an ongoing. Boca's interested, Boca's not interested. They are not a certified local government as far as we know. They have historic preservation element. They have several historic districts. It's just they have not elected to join the program for whatever reason. Back in May of this year, right about the time the tax exemptions went through, we had an outreach and said, what is the tax exemption program look like? And then we heard nothing back from, they were made aware of this presentation, encouraged to follow along, but we heard nothing back, so.
Would there be an obligation for them to also give the same type of a concession for the municipal taxes?
The municipalities, as I understand it, get to control whatever level they give, so whatever we do would
With
just
or
be.
without this agreement?
Right, yeah.
I see. Okay, very good. Commissioner Sachs, I saw your light was on. Do you have a comment?
I do. I didn't know whether we should wait until we have comments. Is there anybody here who wants to speak? We have a couple? Why don't I wait until after the speakers are here?
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner. All right, then why don't we take the public comments? Commissioner Kerner?
Thank you, Mayor. We'll start with Amanda Skyer from the Preservation Foundation of Palm Beach, and then Frederique Miltner.
Thank you for coming. You have 3 minutes.
Good morning, Mayor Weinroth and County Commissioners. I'm Amanda Skyer. I'm the President and CEO of the Preservation Foundation of Palm Beach, which serves the town of Palm Beach. I also am a resident of the city of West Palm Beach. I've served on the city's historic board for the last 10 years, and I'm currently its chair. And I live in a historic district within the city and have participated and benefited from the tax exemption program. So I'm here today to speak in favor. I'd like to offer 3 reasons why this program is crucial to Palm Beach County. Number 1, our history and historic buildings are important and threatened. Palm Beach County has a rich and wonderful heritage, and our historic buildings tell that story. Historic buildings tangibly link us to our past, add to our sense of place, and enhance our quality of life. Heritage tourism, people visiting because of our unique historic character, is a valuable part of the local economy. And yet our historic buildings are under threat. Demolitions and non-compatible development threaten the character of our communities. Our hot, humid climate rapidly deteriorates building materials. Wind and flooding events are becoming more common. We must harden and protect the valuable building stock, which often occurs through major rehabilitation projects that frequently take advantage of the tax exemption program. Number 2, preservation is sustainable. You may have heard that the greenest building is the one that's already built, which is unquestionably true. Our historic buildings contain large amounts of embodied energy and are made of materials of far better quality than what is available today. Our society readily recognizes the value of recycling, glass, aluminum, plastic, etc., but the demolition of one 20-foot wide and 120-foot deep downtown commercial building is equivalent to not recycling approximately 1.3 million aluminum cans. Preservation is important to create a sustainable community, and the tax exemption helps people afford to preserve. And my final reason, it makes financial sense and sense. The money spent on a historic building rehabilitation project is typically 30% materials and 70% labor, as opposed to new construction, which is often closer to the inverse. This means that more local jobs, typically skilled construction jobs, are created by preservation projects. Those workers then go out and spend their money in the local community, which in turn supports other businesses and the local economy as a whole. Historic areas are typically some of the most dense and therefore most profitable areas in terms of tax value. I'm just finishing up right now. Historic areas also tend to have a very high percentage of new job creation, startup businesses, and creative businesses. These businesses recognize the value of historic places. And the tax exemption program does not lose money. It only temporarily delays increasing potential tax revenue.
I got to cut you off.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. Is this podium okay? Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Frederique Mettner. I'm the City Historic Preservation Planner for the City of West Palm Beach, and I want to thank you for everything that you do for Palm Beach County, keeping it authentic and unique, because that's what preservation is about. You've heard from Brian and Amanda. There's many reasons to support this program, and I encourage you to continue it the way it currently operates, because it focuses on homeowners and letting them improve their properties, much more so than commercial structures, as you've seen the numbers. And my favorite part about preservation is the sustainable aspect. I know Amanda spoke to that, but there's so much embodied energy within these structures, and keeping them out of the landfill and utilizing structures that are located in eastern Palm Beach County and have already much denser communities, already established infrastructure, is just a wise move from a development standpoint. And so it's the sustainable aspect that I encourage you to take a look at. You've taken other measures in the county to make sure that we are mindful of our future. And we've had many homes in West Palm Beach designate specifically because of this tax incentive, where these structures could have been demolished otherwise. I'm sure you've read the news lately, especially south of Southern, so many demolitions where there are no protections. And again, this is a sustainable measure. So this is really the only incentive, the only financial incentive cities have in the county to promote historic preservation. And I encourage you to keep the program the way it is. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, those are our comments. Commissioner Sachs, did you want to follow up?
Sure, I do. Thank you very much, Mayor. Thank you for those who came to speak on behalf of this program. I think it's an excellent program. The idea of preserving some of our places. I wish we had more in the cities. I agree that there are some places in East Boca, even in East Del Rey, that really could be recognized as an historic. I have a question with regard specifically to the Breakers Hotel, and I want to, and this is really to staff, the tax exemptions that we give to a commercial to a commercial building, that goes towards those savings on taxes, goes towards incentivizing the owners to rehabilitate the building. Is that correct? Is that how it goes?
That is correct. And it's only for, in the case of the Breakers, they did have other things that they renovated. It was only on those things that were designated historic or part of the historic well-being if you are the building. Like, it wasn't if they wanted to go add a new kitchen that's totally not historic, they would get nothing for that, and they have not. It's only for the pieces that are and go to the historic fabric there.
And we consider, from these good organizations, they tell us what parts of these buildings need to be maintained for preservation rather than a golf course or, but we're looking at balconies and places like that. The Flagler Museum is not included in this, and I was wondering if there was a reason why that I'm not catching. I read this in the summary, and I didn't see any specific about that.
Well, anything that's a museum or an institutional use does not get taxed the same way, but it's also, again, it's owner. So my assumption is the reason we don't see the Flagler Museum is it's an institutional entity. And so, things like Bethesda by the Sea, we don't see. It's a place of worship. They're taxed differently. It's really for the historic, or it's for the taxes that any income producing or residential owner would see. So that's why they're almost exclusively just residential, or they're a commercial property. We don't see anything else. There
I
aren't.
don't see churches or synagogues like that because they already have a
mean, they
special
could pursue-
tax basis.
Right. They could pursue a designation, but they're not going to be in the tax incentive program.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Answered my questions. Thank you.
Just to reemphasize the fact that Boca is not a part of this program. So the $200 million renovation going on at the Boca Raton could have had some benefits under this program. Obviously not all of it, because some of it is just, putting pools in and slides and stuff like that. But anything that could have been attributed to historical preservation, they would have qualified?
Had they agreed to go through and, yes, it was Asda Meisner's pool and they wanted to redo it or something like that, yeah, they could. I just don't know the level of what they did, and they didn't go through it, and we don't see it. So
Sure.
The idea is, yes, they should, but.
All right. Vice Mayor?
Thank you. I think I'm the only one up here who lives in a historic home, and sorry, the 70s don't count yet. I think it's important, though, and I appreciate your presentation, Brian, and the folks from the public who spoke, but most of the stuff we do on our houses don't qualify. It's not historic preservation, it's just regular maintenance, and so we get no exemption there. So, whether you're replacing, plumbing or fixing electrical or a new roof or whatever, you're gonna pay, there's nothing historic about that, so we don't get exemptions on that, and that's why you see them come in, but they're small amounts. They're, in particular, they have to be done in a certain way to preserve whatever the history was. And I have to say, in a lot of the homes in my neighborhood, people don't even know what was original versus not, because over the years things have changed. So, but if you do find something original and you can preserve it, then this does provide a potential benefit for folks. So I don't see it getting out of hand. I don't see it, applied in a way that is deleterious to the rest of the community. And in fact, if you look at the values of the properties that are deemed in historic, in our case in West Palm Beach, we have a number of historic neighborhoods. They tend to be higher value than their neighbors just right next door to them, simply because of the uniqueness of I think the neighborhood and the characteristics they have. So I've seen it applied. It's not an automatic. You have to work through, in the case of the city of West Palm Beach, you have to work through the historic preservation. They have to, agree to it in advance, then you have to do the work, then they have to sign off on it. So it's pretty limited, and the benefits that we derive for maintaining these properties, I think, are advantageous to the entire county. So I think it's a good program, and I'd like to see us continue to support it.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Commissioner Bernard?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to thank staff for this presentation. I've worked with the Historic Preservation Board in Delray and West Palm Beach, and as Amanda and Frederick stated, this is something that I believe that we need to continue, and there's no need for us to change what we're doing right now. I think that if there's something that changes later, then we can, but I'd support keeping everything as is right now. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner McKinley.
Thank you. No, my joke, Commissioner, or Vice Mayor Weiss, was sometimes I feel like my apartment is old. But it's not. Actually, the last house I lived in before, when I was a little girl, before I moved to Florida, was in Massachusetts, and it was actually built in the 1700s. So I do know what it's like to live in a historic structure. I'm trying to remember the reason why we asked for this presentation. I think maybe it was because several of these came through at one time, and we wanted to make sure it wasn't being abused. It's very clear it's not. I don't support making any changes to it at this time. And I really want to thank Amanda for her presentation, because some of those arguments and those points that you made, they were very good, and it made me think a different way. So thank you for your presentation, too.
Very good. Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Kerner.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the presentation. I think there's obviously value in maintaining this program, but one of the things that struck me is the complexity and resources required to effectively maneuver to obtain these exemptions, and I'm wondering if there's ways for local governments to help facilitate preservation in traditionally disadvantaged communities. I mean, it's great to see the Everglades Club get a tax exemption and some of these larger institutions that have a lot of resources, but are there things that the local government can do to encourage, to assist, to help subsidize the application process and make it easier on other communities as well?
Commissioner, I think that's a point we could communicate to our partner cities, and I think as Brian, pointed out originally, we're not getting exemptions through unincorporated Palm Beach County, so we're relying on our partner cities to do the great majority of the heavy lifting, the districts, their regions, their areas where eligibility is created. But I think that point, we could take that if that's the board's direction and communicate that sort of thing back and share that with those cities and see what they could do to expand that mission.
And just to that, I can add a little bit. We have looked at unincorporated historic districts in the past. We had worked with Canal Point about 15 years ago to look at designating unincorporated Canal Point as a historic district. And there were enough other issues that they had that the historic district designation was the least of their concerns, and they elected not to pursue it. We've also looked just informally, but more through the data and doing like windshield surveys, we looked at areas in the county that are older, because what we find, and to be perfectly blunt about it, if there's a really good neighborhood and it looks like it's historic, it's been annexed into a municipality, so we don't have the resources like a Delray Beach or a West Palm Beach or Boca would have. But we tend to have those neighborhoods that are what we call, they're in the OCR world, they're the countywide community revitalization team, and they've already got a whole separate slew of options, and they're the ones that potentially may be old enough that could be districts, but they're not the kind of things that are resources that are looking for renovations that would be benefited by this. So it's an arrow in the quiver that we could go and use, but we're not hearing that they're having issues where a historic district designation could be a benefit, or that pursuing tax credits could be an incentive for them. It's something we've looked at, but we've never brought it forward because there's just frankly not been a need, but we are very aware of it. So we've made the analysis, if you will, informally. We just didn't see a need to bring it forward, or it would unnecessarily complicate things if we did. And so,
Thank you. Commissioner McKinley?
Yeah, just one quick question. When I look at the municipalities that have these interlocal agreements with you, or with the county, have the Glades, any of the cities out in the Glades tried to apply for any of these?
we've not heard anything. I know that the city of Pahokee has used the Main Street program for doing some of their facade renovations in their little downtown area. I'm not sure of Belglade. We've not had a great ongoing communication with them. It's just, frankly, we're not sure what their need is or if there's a lot of interest in pursuing it. Usually the issue in a disadvantaged community is a historic district designation is regarded as yet another hurdle. And it's, so for that reason, that I'm intuiting that's why we haven't heard a lot from them. I don't know for sure that that's really the case. We just haven't heard from them, so.
You addressed the issue of economic benefits of historic preservation. What is the cost? What is the cost in, to the tax base, either in the valuation that's being shielded or the actual dollars that we're not collecting because of this?
The actual value that you're not collecting in this year's budget, and this is why looking back to 2013 is helpful, is you get to see everything. But this year, effectively, $735,000 were not on the tax rolls. Now, the 2013 numbers will go on, and then, but everything you approve this year won't come off until 2031. So.
Right, and multi-billion-dollar budget, it's pretty de minimis.
Right, and for that, you also had $154 million invested in historic resources for $735,000 cumulatively.
Has anybody tried to come up with a number of what tourism is benefiting from the historical?
I actually did call the Tourist Development Council, or actually I emailed them, and they're like, no, we don't have numbers on that. We've asked over the years, and it's just not one that I think they know how to break out.
Right.
So, yeah, we would love to know that number, because it's a number that we keep hearing about, that it contributes to it. We just don't have it as a data source to report. I would love to have it.
I think any concerns I had about the equities of this program certainly have been addressed today, and the 10-year ending of the program, I think, certainly addresses that concern. And again, $735,000, while it's certainly money, I think it's certainly an investment that's well worth it. If I see no more lights on, I'm going to think that we are past the need to continue with this subject, and we can move on to code enforcement. So thank you very much, Mr. Rutter, for bringing this forward. All right, it's called for 10:30, but since this is a workshop, we have flexibility, so why don't we move forward?
Maybe the South County Administrative Complex can be designated a historic structure.
No, we're not going to declare the South County Annex Administrative Complex an historical complex.
This building could qualify.
No, that would eliminate a lot of discussion. Well, having come from Boston, we know what historic buildings are. Paul Revere and, the Freedom Trail. All right. I don't know if it was the subject or what, but we have just lost a couple of our colleagues up here, but we will carry on. Let's talk about timely compliance for code enforcement. Ramsey, you going to take it, or?
Yeah, I'm going to ask Ramsey to actually lead off and introduce our folks here.
Good morning, everyone. The point of this meeting today is to kind of give you an update of what code enforcement does. We've been kind of in the news a lot lately, doing some good things, but also need some direction on trying to make it more efficient and how better we can enforce some of our county rules and regulations and policies set by the board. With me to my right is Michelle Pagan. She's our new code enforcement director. She's still here after several months, so that's good. Rick Torrance to my left, he's been here for about 25 years, so he can give you some real-life examples of the things we run into on a daily basis. Shannon Fox, county attorney, that handles all our code enforcement matters. And then we have OFMB on the far right that collects the cash. And on that note, we don't really collect much, as everyone thinks, because we actually really just try to come into compliance. So with that, I'll get going on the slides. That's the next one. So our mission statement with code enforcement is to enforce our ordinances and rules and regulations that have been put in place by the board, and also to follow Florida statutes. We have a team of attorneys that help us. We've been very successful. You've seen some things in the newspapers of enforcing all these things, and we try to do them equally and efficiently and equitably. One of our main visions is to maintain the neighborhoods and communities' quality of life, and we actually do that in several different ways. We have teams that go out. We work with the CCRT areas and Houston Tate's team to go into some of these areas and try to fix them and make them look more appealable, which actually brings up the property values and try, to help folks. With that, next slide. Compliance is really our goal. We did a recent study in the acreage, I think it was done maybe 3 years ago, on the amount of fines we actually collected, and I think we reduced the fines by 95, 97% on those that came into compliance. So it's not about fining people, it's just about having people come into compliance is really what our key goal is. And with that, these guys out in the field do a ton of education. Things have gotten a lot more complex lately and a lot more difficult. And if any of your aides have looked at our case notes, you can see there used to be, when I first started here 9 years ago, a couple sentences. Well, now there's pages of case notes of the detail that we get into on a daily basis with these, all these cases. Additionally, what we've done, and I'm kind of jumping around, is we've required all our staff now, all our code enforcement officers to become members of and pass courses in FACE, Florida Association of Code Enforcement. So that was never done in the past, but now it's mandatory. If you're a code officer, you have to pass certain levels. So we're doing that, and we host that in the Vista Center. Next slide here is an org chart. I'm not going to go through all of it, but these folks are responsible for every single property in unincorporated. So when you dive into it, every code officer has approximately 6,500 properties they're responsible for. It's an impossible task. We just cannot keep up, but they do the best they can. It's just a ton of properties, so that's why we're trying to become a lot more efficient at what we do. Here are some of the things that we do enforce: housing, property maintenance code, ELDC, zoning code, fire code, building code, BTRs, code of ordinances. We do a foreclosure registry, which in '08 was extremely important. We work with WUD, with illegal water use, people hooking up to hydrants, curb stoning. That's become a non-issue, and curb stoning was where people would just park their cars on the side of the road for sale, and we fixed that real quick. We just ended up towing them, and then they had to show proof of ownership, registration, etc. So it's kind of a non-issue now. Special permits, we go through marine violations. A lot of people are renting out multiple docks at their house, and they rent out to, they just rent them out and it turns into a marina. And then you got the chefs, the cooks, the boat mechanics, all those coming into a neighborhood, and that actually happened in your district. And that's how some of these things got started, because one boat can have up to 10, 20, 15 people there, so it turns the neighborhood into a commercial area. So work with that. Big thing we did was the COVID task force, the CECT teams that we went out during COVID. The results of that, they're still actually coming through, is multiple illegal nightclubs being shut down, liquor licenses revoked, all kinds of illegal things, shootings, stabbings, and a lot of those, even though they try to sue us, we've won in court on every single one, and now those bad actors are no longer there. And that really helps the taxpayers, because the calls for service and some of these were in the hundreds, and every time a deputy goes out there, it costs the county money. Next one. So a lot of people don't realize all the agencies we work with, so I want to run through some of them real quick. So obviously County Administrator, Ms. Baker, we get direction from her and Patrick. County Attorney's Office, we have Shannon, who's our lead attorney, and then we have appellate attorneys in her office too. PZB, obviously. Sheriff's Department, we work with them quite a lot. They'll come to us with a problem area. Sometimes it's suspected in human trafficking, or it's suspected, you name it. They'll come to us and see if there's a way we can assist in either getting them in there or trying to fix the problem, or trying to fix the problem right up front. Sometimes we have issues with some of the nightclubs that the shootings at and all those kinds of things, and then we'll require deputies to be there. We work with the fire rescue, lots of life safety. We actually hold their hearings in our hearings. So when fire alarms have expired or they don't have the correct life safety issues, we do that for them. Engineering, public works, South Florida water management, public safety, animal care and control, consumer affairs, emergency management, work with Lake West Dangerous District, the Internal Auditor, Inspector General, Housing, Economic Sustainability, OFB, and the Tax Collector. So
I think you left off one, the BCC. I think we kind of call you every now and then.
there's a whole separate side for that because you guys keep us really busy. So no, and your aides are great, and so we work with a ton of people, and so I have to give credit to code enforcement staff because they've had to really learn a lot more things than they ever used to have to learn. It's no longer just cutting the lawn or painting a building or something. They have to dig deep into zoning and planning and all kinds of technical things. So this is how busy we are. So in 2021, we had over 13,000 complaints. Out of that, almost 11,000 of them were substantiated and notice of violations were issued. 87% of those were closed before we even went to a hearing, which is what we really want. We don't want to go to hearings. Shannon's great, and she pretty much wins every hearing for us, but we really don't want to take them to hearing. We would like to get them to voluntarily comply. And out of all of those cases, only 13 cases required special magistrate hearings. And Shannon can correct me if I'm wrong. I think I've been here maybe 9 years. I think we've only had maybe 2 or 4 cases dismissed out of all the cases that we hear. So that goes to show that when we bring a case, we really do our research and prepare and are following the laws and the rules. So some of the things that when I first started here that we had problems with was the delay in getting any kind of action. People would call and we used to have 10 days in which to respond, so that's 2 weeks. People don't like that, and we definitely saw that they don't like it during COVID because everyone was at home and they noticed all the issues with the neighbors. So we reduced that to 3 business days, and now it's less than 2 business days, and Michelle and Rick are on top of that, so you get a response really quickly now as opposed to just waiting 2 weeks to get anything done. Our life safety violations, those are addressed within a 24-hour period. So that's taken very seriously, and then we specially schedule hearings just for those. One of the things we've tried doing, we've reached out to COBRA and several big, large HOAs, is to have them be our eyes and ears, because we can't be everywhere all the time. Unfortunately, legislature changed it where you can't be anonymous anymore, so some people are sometimes hesitant now because they have to give their name and address when they call in a complaint, and then you have neighbor v. neighbor. I think it was an attempt to stop the anonymous calls from creating issues, but I think it kind of backfired maybe. So we have lots of training with HOAs. We train landlord tenants on, if you see something, say something, because we can't be there everywhere. We have an on-call code enforcement officer that's at our office during business hours. Anyone can come in and speak to them directly or call them directly, and they will be able to educate you and look up your case and talk to you about it. And then also your folks and your aides all have access to our online portal, so you can see the pictures and notes and everything on all of that. And then our code enforcement training and certification, we have legal, give seminars to our code folks to make sure they're not breaking any of the laws. Zoning, planning, building, fire, all of them kind of teach our guys some of the things that they need to know, because it's unlimited, the amount of things our guys got to know. It's really a tough job. These are some of the flyers that we have that we hand out to folks. We'll make sure you have some before we leave today, just to kind of educate people so they know what they're doing. Here are some of the common code violations we get. So site plan violations, you're all familiar with that. Someone comes in here, gets approval through you folks for a site plan. They either don't implement it or they implement it, and then it all falls apart. So we bring those back into compliance. Expired permits, that's a big deal that we're trying to work with. We have probably 20,000 expired permits in the county, and that's simply just people applied for the roof permit and didn't get the final inspection. We're working with building department to try fix that and maybe automate it somewhat so we can clean those out. Lots of unpermitted structures, and we get this all the time. We had a good meeting last night where lots of stuff was unpermitted, and everyone thinks because they bought it and it was there it's legal and it's grandfathered, and that's not the case. So we are trying to educate folks to come to our office to research, are there all the permits that are required before you buy the house? Interior and exterior disrepair, housing standards, obviously, you know, we had the issue in Pahokee, that was a big deal. Fire codes, pool water maintenance and safety barriers, that's a big one. And I didn't quite understand why we cared about pool water clarity. We care about it because if someone falls in the pool, you can't see them. So that's why we want the pools, has to be clear so you can see if someone's in there and you can go get them. Inoperative and unlicensed intellect vehicles, that was a problem in certain areas where people just have these abandoned cars, so now we make them actually, they have to be able to run and be registered, and that stopped some of all the, per se, junkyard kind of things. Dead trees in medians, landscapes, we dealt with you, Commissioner Weiss, on the, I think in one of the median issues that I think got resolved. Trash and debris, and then the BTRs and occupancy. Occupancy is a big thing because a lot of people, particularly with the landscape services, have taken single-family homes or trailers and turned them into offices. Well, that's a whole different occupancy through the building code. And again, I didn't quite understand why it was such a big deal, but when we speak to fire, they have real issues because if you've got X many people in a building, they may not be able to get in, or once they're in, they may not be able to get out because the windows and things are not meant for commercial use. So we've learned a lot about that. Here's just some brief pictures of some of the issues that we faced on a day-to-day basis. These are fairly easy ones. Everyone can see the grass is too tall. This one is actually a condemned building in Century Village, and we actually met with them on Monday. Simple, and this is part of the education and outreach that we try to do, a simple kitchen renovation turns into 2 units being condemned because they didn't get permits and they didn't hire someone with a license, and that person decided to take out a load-bearing wall and the unit upstairs started sinking. So now I've got 2 really mad people because both units are unsafe and they can't stay in those units. So that's how critical it is on some of these things to get permits. Here's some more examples: spalling concrete, Surfside kind of thing on the left, and then just regular disrepair. Here are some of the more fun things that we get to deal with on a daily basis, and I'm sure none of you would like to live next to any of this. But surprisingly enough, when we're dealing with these property maintenance things, these guys have a really hard time because people get very protective, even though they're, for lack of a better term, junk, they're protective. And when these guys go tell them to remove it, sometimes can be a challenge, but some of our investigations that we use are, and the biggest one is probably the commercial use in residential areas. Landscape service is a classic example. It started off with 1 truck, now you've got 50 trucks next to your single-family residential. How we typically view the commercial uses in residential, if you don't know it's a commercial use, then more than likely it's okay. So if you're a lawyer that just does everything online and doesn't have 50 customers a day, you're probably okay, but it's the customers that are coming in and the traffic and the noise, and that's when it starts requiring zoning approvals. Setbacks, a lot of people do things again without permits. We have to enforce setbacks. Farm animals, amazingly enough, we get a ton of complaints with chickens and particularly roosters because they are loud. Unpermitted construction hours, noise violations, lots of noise violations, adult entertainment issues, human trafficking with the massage parlor things. We go and investigate all those, special event permits, signs. We cannot keep up with this illegal signs. It's just impossible. They go, the minute you pick them up, Rick can probably attest to how many truckloads a week we pick up.
Yeah, we do sweeps quite frequently, and we're out there loading up trucks with signs, and they just pop back up again. But we try to stay on it the best we can.
And then we also have a lot of commercial vehicles issues. Acreage is one that comes to mind. Jupiter Farms comes to mind, where people want to park all their big commercial vehicles, and it makes a single-family neighborhood that everyone bought into look like a commercial area. So there's fights on both sides of that. On that. Next one. So here's a how we do some of our investigations. So we can go online through our satellite imagery and pretty much look at everything. It's open to the public. And what's interesting, you have a picture on the top left is how it used to be, and then the right is how it is now. Interestingly enough, it's still classified as, through the property appraiser, as vacant land because it has no legal approval. So you've got this commercial use on per se vacant land, not paying taxes on the commercial use because it's illegal, it has no approval, but it's classified as vacant. So that's an issue that we're trying to deal with. But you can see how quickly it just goes from vacant to they just move in and start the landscape services. And I'm not picking on landscape services, but they're the most open and notorious ones that we've had lately. Here's some life safety issues that we find that happen. I don't really need to go much, but clearly that electrical wiring on the bottom right is not good. Yeah, and living on the boat is probably not good either. But after we teach and educate and help, and we work a lot with PBSO. We used to have some of the inmates help us before COVID come and would come help clean some of the things, but there's an after picture, and obviously you can see it looks way better than it does now. So here's our compliance flowchart, and how we do things. And and please feel free to ask questions because it's a very fluid process. Obviously we have to pay attention to Florida statute, but it always also comes into reasonable time to comply, and reasonable is an eye and beholder sometimes. So please feel free to ask questions. So typically we get a complaint. The complaint comes two ways, either from someone from the public or someone from your office, or one of the code officers drive by and see something that just pops out. We don't have the time with 6,500 properties to go and actually research every single property, but the big ticket items that we drive by, these guys see, and will then dig further. After they see that or someone reports it, we'll go do a site visit. During that site visit, everyone has their portable laptops. You can pull up all the permit history, you can pull up zoning history, all the approvals, you can pull up anything and see what's supposed to be there and what's not supposed to be there. Once we've done that, we verify that there's a violation, and then we send a notice of violation. Now, notice of violation isn't a, per se, actual violation. It's just noticing that you potentially may have a violation. You need a magistrate to go and tell you have an actual violation. So this notice of violation is just, hey, we think you've got a problem. This is what you need to do to fix it. There is some language in there that scares some folks because it does say up to $1,000 a day fine, but that's per statute, so it's just in there. Hopefully, once they get that notice of violation, they voluntarily come to compliance or call us and say, hey, what do I need to do to fix this fence? What do I need to do to get you guys out of my hair? And once that happens, then we'll just re-inspect and close the case. Sometimes there's the life safety issues, and so we don't really play around with those. If it's a life safety issue, you're going straight to a hearing, or it needs to get fixed within 24 hours. So once you get your notice of violation and you decide you don't want to fix whatever we think you need to fix, you get scheduled for magistrate hearing. And with all of this, the notice of violation, so for instance, if I give you a notice of violation that you built your garage without a permit, I have to, in that notice, give you reasonable time to comply. I can't just say you need a permit in 10 days. Building department's not going to get you that in 10 days. So I have to give you reasonable time in order to comply. So that could be 6 months, 9 months on that. Then, if you still don't do that, we'll schedule you for a hearing. And that takes 30 or 60 days for a hearing. Then once you go to the hearing and the magistrate finds you in violation, he still, by statute, has to give you reasonable time to comply. So he can't just give you, hey, you've had 9 months already, I'm giving you 30 days. He still can't do that. So he has to give reasonable time. And that's when Shannon kind of impresses upon them that in order for this case to stick, we have to do that. So it is somewhat frustrating because these are long time frames, and if you're the neighbor that's calling in the complaint, you get very aggravated, but we have to follow the law, and we do that quite well. So that's why, that's kind of like how it goes. At the magistrate hearing, we have 2 hearings. We have uncontested and contested. The uncontested, you come in, hey, sorry, yes, I'll cut the lawn. Hey, can you give me 2 more weeks? I need to do this. Hey, you got me, I'll fix it. Give me a month. You go into the uncontested, in front of a magistrate, sign an order, and you move on with your life. The contested ones are where Shannon usually sits, and that's where they want to fight and duke it out. And so those, we've had some, we've seen them in the newspaper. Those have been some interesting ones. So, that's where we do that. And prior to all of this, when we prep for any case, all these folks get in a room with the code officer, with Shannon, with the director, with Rick, and go over all the particulars of every single case, and to make sure it's legitimate, and then also to recommend compliance deadlines. So by the time it actually gets in front of a magistrate, I've seen it most of the time. Shannon's definitely seen it. Rick's seen. Everyone's seen it. So it's a pretty tight case before we even present it, because we obviously don't want to lose. But we've gone through all the facts. We've dealt with building, zoning, planning, fire, whoever we've had to verify that everything's legitimate. So then we present in front of a special magistrate, and a lot of times we'll make a recommendation that, hey, magistrate, give them 60 days or a fine of X. And that's all in our PPMs, how we do that. After the magistrate hearing, a certain amount of days to comply, give them 60 days or a fine of $100 thereafter. Day 61, the person starts getting fined. So I kind of alluded to this previously. Every case is different, and things that affect a timely resolution are different. Sometimes you got little Miss Jones who doesn't have the resources, and we have to understand that she doesn't have the resources, and it may take some time. Sometimes trash in the front yard, well, just go pick up the trash. That's a quick fix. You don't need 30 days. It does take a lot of time through the building department. We're extremely busy, and we also have savvy people that won't allow us access, and then we have to go through the legal system to get inspection warrants, etc. We also have to give proper notice. Sometimes notice is not accepted, and that becomes an issue. Then we also have, the additional research with probate, development orders, zoning issues, etc. that we've got to go through. So I'll move on now. Let Shannon do her show, because she's the one that keeps us keeps us in compliance with state law.
So Ramsey already touched on most of this, but the county enforces its codes and ordinances pursuant to Chapter 162 Florida statutes. And 162 Florida statutes dictates most of the processes and procedures that code enforcement is required to follow and provides the remedies that are available. Pursuant to the statute, an inspector is required to give a violator a reasonable period of time to correct unless the violation is a repeat violation, it presents a serious threat to the public health, safety, and welfare, or if it's irreparable or irreversible. As touched on by Ramsey, if the special magistrate at a hearing finds the property in violation, the magistrate is then required to give the respondent a reasonable period of time to correct in addition. And the reasonable period of time depends upon the nature of the violation. Generally, if a violation is picking up trash and debris, we give 30 days because we need to give time for that order to actually get to the respondent so that they can correct that violation. But violations that have to do with site plans or Class A conditional use can take up to 9 months or more. So the time period provided depends on the nature of the case. As Ramsey stated, if the order is not complied with, the fines begin to accrue until compliance is achieved. However, once an order is not complied with, the best practices of code enforcement are that we send an affidavit of noncompliance to the violator to let them know they did not comply with the special magistrate order, and they have 20 days to request another hearing before a special magistrate to speak about the status of the violation, the amount of the fine to be imposed, and the recording of the lien. And that was put into place by code enforcement years ago based upon a case, Massey versus Charlotte County, where the court stated that the county had to fill in the procedural gaps that are in the statute and had to give an extra layer of due process before a lien is recorded on a parcel of property. And so we added that additional layer of due process before we go forward and file a lien on a property. After we do that, the statute provides that after 3 months from recording the lien, the magistrate can authorize the county to foreclose on a lien or to recover a money judgment for the amount of the lien plus interest accrued. So those are the basic remedies if a property remains in noncompliance, to either foreclose on the property or to seek a money judgment. And as you already know, through the cases we had, homesteaded properties cannot be foreclosed on, so it limits that remedy for probably the majority or half of the cases that we have. And that is just the brief overview that I have. I think OFMB has the next slide.
Right, so I'll refer to OFMB. They're our collections arm of code enforcement.
Good morning. My name is Robin Lawrence, Division Director in OFMB, and I'm joined here today with my Department Director, Sherry Brown. And we're just going to describe for you the process once the code liens reach the Office of Financial Management and Budget. Within our department, the Revenue Collections section is responsible and has oversight for the collection of these particular debts. Again, that is housed in the Financial Management Division of our department. We are governed by PPM, countywide PPM F048, and essentially we are responsible for the recovery of delinquent debts due to the county, including liens and judgments in favor of Palm Beach County. That may include bankruptcies, special assessments that you all may approve that come before you from water utilities and engineering. Also, public service tax if we have different vendors who have not remitted those payments, and also code liens, which we're discussing today. Code enforcement sends us a referral list that includes all the different outstanding liens within the unincorporated county. And the fiscal year 21, we received a total of 157 properties. And again, just to kind of reiterate what was mentioned earlier, that during that same fiscal period, there were roughly 11,000 notices of violation within PZMB. At this time, we currently have about 1,400 outstanding liens that are either handled in-house or handled by a third party. Once we receive that referral list from PZMB, we make contact with all of the property owners via mail. Property owners have about 45 days to respond before we refer them to our third-party vendor. We currently contract with Penn Credit, and if a property owner responds to us within that 45-day period, we will then continue those collection efforts in-house with our collections team. Last fiscal year, 21, there were approximately 10 property owners who responded within that 45-day window. I do want to make a note that most property owners will not take any action unless they are looking to either refinance their mortgage or they're looking to sell their property. So again, they're looking to clear title, so that kind of gets this whole process going. And it is worth noting that according to state statute, code liens last for 20 years once the lien is recorded. After that time, it is expired. When a particular property owner reaches out to us, basically we want to know, is the property in compliance? If the property is not in compliance, we're going to refer that property owner back to code enforcement because, again, the goal is to bring the property into compliance. However, if we notice that the property is in compliance, then we can start our process in the collection section. Some individuals may opt to make a lump payment to our particular office, or they may opt to come together with some type of payment plan. We've had payments as low as $50 on a monthly basis, but again, we want to work with them. If an individual or property owner is looking to have a reduction in the outstanding lien that is $2,500 or greater, that then triggers us to come to this body for approval of a particular settlement negotiation. And again, you all will see those periodically throughout the fiscal year. Now, a few things to keep in mind as we work through those particular negotiated settlements. Each case is different, so we take a look at those particular mitigating factors. So again, we want to talk about the timeline of what happened from what commenced the lien up until this particular point in time. Additionally, we want to know what has the property owner done to cure the particular violation, and any other pertinent information. Again, this may be personal circumstance, what kind of contact contact have they had with their code enforcement officer? Again, what have they done? What actions have they taken to cure the particular violation? As we are talking with a particular homeowner to come up with some type of settlement agreement, we do request a copy of the HUD settlement as well as a copy of the sales contract, because we want to know how much is the home going to sell for. Again, if the lien is greater than the value of the home, then we have a problem. So again, we'll be working with the property owners, and I just want to note that we're not making those decisions in a vacuum. We do partner with the county attorney's office as well as PZNB, specifically code enforcement, to kind of make sure that, you know, we haven't missed any particular facts of the case. We do take a look through the EPZB database to kind of make sure we have the facts of the case, and it's a process of working together with our other county agencies. Once all of those parties reach some type of conclusion, we then will proceed with an agenda item that is presented to this board for your review and approval. Once an agenda item is approved, property owners have 60 days to remit payments, but if something happens and the person needs a little bit more time, again, we will work with the property owner so that they can make that final payment for whatever what has been settled. Now, these next few slides are going to give you all some financial data from 2018 forward, again, fiscal year 18. This first slide, I'm highlighting what the BCC has approved. So again, these are actual agenda items that have come before you for homestead properties. And if you take a look, in 2018, there were a total of 2 settlement agreements before this body. That settlement agreement amount was $22,500, and the average amount that we've collected when you look at the settlement amount over the outstanding lien is roughly 36%. Again, these are rounded. That the column that states the percentage of the liens collected just gives you the range for those all the different settlement agreements. So in FY18, we had one that was 35% collected and one that was 38%. And then you can just move down the chart until we get to the current fiscal year. And this reflects 2 homestead property agreements year to date. The total here from 2018 through the present is roughly $256,000 for outstanding liens totaling just north of $1.1 million. The next slide reflects BCC approved settlement agreements for non-homestead properties. Again, same setup where we have a total of 6 settlement agreements that came before this body in FY 2018. The total settlement amount, roughly $166,000, and the average collected is 26%. Again, if you go to the bottom at FY 22, this is year-to-date non-homestead properties. The total reflected since 2018 collected is just north of $1.1 million in settlements for outstanding liens just north of $10 million. Again, this is for non-homestead properties. Our next slide reflects payments that have come into our office that do not come before this body. So an individual has opted to pay their outstanding lien in full. And so we have the total number from 2018 to 27. And if you move down the page to FY22, that number looks really, really low. It's 3, and it's because we initiated a code lien amnesty program in Q1 of this fiscal year. I have some details on the next slide. And the amnesty program ran for us from October 1st through November 30th of 2021. Properties must have been in compliance, and there was a $250 application fee. Total applications received were 254, and of that, we approved 213 and denied 41. The bulk of those denials were because the properties were not in compliance. If an individual submitted an application, we encouraged them to get that property in compliance during the duration of the program. If they were able to get it into compliance before the end of the program period, we could then move forward with them. But if the property was not in compliance by November 30th, then it would have just, nothing would have happened with that particular property, and the lien is still outstanding. During this time period, total collected was $61,000, and the total amount given is just roughly $31.5 million. And that concludes the collections section. And at this time, we'll take any questions from the Board of County Commissioners.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that presentation. Commissioner Kerner, you're up.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to all the presenters here today. I very much appreciated the presentation. I also very much appreciate the service of code enforcement officers. I know they have a difficult job, but it's an important one. And so I know we're all very appreciative of the work that they do. I just had two quick questions. With regards to anonymous complaints, also on the COVID sort of compassionate waiver program, we waived $31 million in liens. And I think that speaks to the overall goal of this board and code enforcement in general is not to collect these funds, but is to get properties into compliance. And so I thought that was a very good use of your professional skills, and I think that it went very well and saved a lot of people a lot of money and got a lot of properties into compliance. With regards to anonymous complaints, you know, if you call 911 and you say, hey, I'm not going to tell you my name, but there's a crime happening, the police are going to go. So, you know, if somebody calls in an issue with code enforcement and you're now aware of what's perceived to be a violation, but they don't want to give their identity, does the state law prohibit you from dispatching one of your code enforcement officers?
The state law provides that if there is an imminent threat to public health, safety, or welfare, or sensitive resources, then we would take those anonymous complaints, but no others.
Okay. And then finally, you know, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate Commissioner McKinley's leadership on the landscape services issue. And I am very proud of the way this board handled that issue and continues to handle it, as well as code enforcement. I was wondering, our dear friend and colleague, Representative Rick Roth, recently had a workshop of sorts, a town hall, if you will. I wasn't there, but obviously any of us on this board and professional staff will take caution and concern when a member of the legislature has issues with local government. But I'm wondering what was the catalyst for that, and what's any feedback that you have with regards to his perspective?
Commissioner, yes, you had a number of your staff there last night, I think 6 or 7 of us. Todd was there, Ed was there, your building officials there, Michelle, Ramsey, myself, Commissioner McKinley got to spend the evening with us. Other offices were represented as well. So we took that opportunity in this open meeting to hear what these cited concerns were, and I'm reading from the release that was seeking if you have had problems with actions taken by Palm Beach County Planning, Zoning, or Code Enforcement to please attend. So I think the majority of those who spoke last night, and I'm going to estimate there were 100 to 150, 100 people or so. I don't know the number of speakers, 40, 50 or so. The majority of them spoke to landscape services. This board is very familiar with the many years of work you did on the topic. It was involved, to say the least. I think there's still a number of misconceptions out there by a lot of folks, and those were shared last night. There were also topics brought up related to parking of commercial vehicles, a lot of it speaking to areas in the acreage, Loxahatchee. Again, there were some misunderstandings about code changes that were perceived to have occurred and how enforcement's taking place. Other points were made related to building permitting, fences, sheds, things of that sort. They're all addressable. We are committed to working with the representative's office. We're going to take that feedback we received last night, put something very directed together, reach out to his office, Ramsey, myself, working with Todd and Ed, put that time in, and now that we've certainly heard these points, we're going to respond and certainly clarify a lot of the inaccuracies that we heard last night.
Mayor, may I? Is there any way that you can keep the members of the board informed on the dialogue and the outcome and any intended actions that Representative Roth intends to take in his official capacity as a result of his town hall?
Absolutely, we will.
All right, thank you.
Following up on that, I mean, I've had this same conversation with Representative Roth and have impressed upon him that he shouldn't be jumping all over staff on this particular issue, that it would be a policy issue with respect to the 7 of us, and probably a matter of legislative amendment to the statutes as to how we define what is agriculture and what isn't. And I think that was one of the issues that Representative Roth didn't quite understand when I first discussed it with him. And again, not having been there last night, I'm not quite sure how that conversation went, but I'm hoping that there was both sides there, both the people who feel that we have done something to harm their businesses and those who were looking for the quiet enjoyment of their residential properties. So I want to come back to an issue that I brought up during our agenda review for the July 12th meeting, and Sherry knows where I'm coming from. County Administrator probably does too. We had an item on our agenda last meeting. It was a consent item, and I didn't pull it because I felt that we were having this discussion today. But I have some problems with what I perceive as an arbitrary practice as far as how much we're going to accept on a lien release. And the particular item that was before us at our last meeting was a $360,000 lien that was reduced to 4%, about $15,000, and we accepted that. And had some discussion, understand that this was one that could not be rectified during the forbearance period that we just alluded to. But I still have some concerns because if other residents come in and say, well, you gave this person here a reduction to 4%, why are you hammering me for, I see the average numbers running closer to 15%. So how do we justify that? How do we establish some sort of a process so that someone knows how they can take a $300,000 lien and perhaps reduce it? And I guess that's my real concern right now. And County Administrator, you and I have had some discussion on this, and I'm certainly interested in staff's feedback on that.
So on these, just bear in mind every single case is different. Every person is different. Every case is different, and every single property is unique. So we look at the gravity of the violation typically and the steps taken to come into compliance. Those are pretty much our two key factors that we look at. So for someone to come in here and argue that, well, you gave them 4%, I need 4%, no. Every case is unique. Every property is unique. It's all different. We've had cases, and we've got long-standing cases that are still going that are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars of fines, but they're keeping us in the loop every week. They're working through their permit issues. They've hired engineers. They're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars to come to compliance. That's different than someone that just thumbs their nose at us. Virginia's probably aware of, when I first started here, we had the Panama Hatties thing, and it was $250 a day fine, and they said, well, we make that in the first 20 minutes, so we don't care. And so then those folks pay a big fine at the end of the day. But little Miss Jones, who doesn't have the means on a fixed income, that can't move her shed, it's treated differently. So I can't give you a hard and fast rule, but we do sit down all together in a room with OFMB, and we go through every single case, and that's how we kind of come to these numbers. So I don't have a answer for you other than everyone is different and everyone is unique, but multiple eyes look at it, and we all come into agreement prior to presenting anything to the board or prior to presenting everything to a magistrate.
I'm just concerned, and again, as I take a look at the average liens collected on the exhibits that you have before us, 26%, 33%, 38%, I just find it difficult to be able to stand in front of either a court, magistrate, or whoever's going to be weighing what we are trying to do with a resident and say, this one paid 4%, this one you're asking 36% or 100% or whatever that number is, without some sort of a criteria that's going to be established versus just a feeling.
Well, it's not a feeling. We do have the criteria, and we do have the case notes that go along with each case, and we do have what steps have been taken anytime they apply for a building permit. All that's recorded, all of that is looked at. So we do look at all of those affirmative steps that have been taken to try come into compliance. Now, just sitting on your hands doesn't get you there. You have to do something, and if you are at least trying to do something, whether it takes you a day or 10 years, that's taken into account. It's the people that just sit on their hands that we have the problems with.
Well, and again, I understand anything over $2,500 lien reduction has to come here anyway, so it's not going to be a matter of you making a decision and that's the end of it.
Well, we do hold some liens in-house in code enforcement to let the magistrate decide. Those are the more complex ones, but typically they end up down after a certain time period pursuant to our PPM, they end up down in your hands. But the more complex ones that we are working with on a daily basis, we hold them with us, and then we present that in front of the magistrate, because I'll have the code officer that's working on the case for the last year or two come and testify that he's been there 100 times, he's spoken to Mrs. Jones, she's been really trying to do it, or come and testify and say, no, they haven't done a thing. So I know it's not the perfect answer that you would like, but we can certainly go back and try to look at some more criteria. But again, we just want people to come into compliance. We're not here to make money.
I just want it to be defensible. And I mean, I think that's the issue. I don't think that we want to be in a position where people are going to say, you know, you're being arbitrary. And I don't think we want to be in that position.
I don't believe we've been challenged on this thus far.
Because also, you know, we are working with the property owner, and we're coming up with an agreement. I'm not bringing something to you that they haven't agreed themselves to pay at this point.
I'd agree to
Right.
4% on a $350,000 lien myself. Commissioner Bernard, you came on just now during this conversation. Did you want to follow up on that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I've had my first, when in the city of Delray Beach, I was on the code enforcement board. So, you know, I've had the chance to sit down and hear the arguments. And what I can tell you, Mr. Mayor, there's not a one-size-fits-all to address it. And I do know that staff, you know, before they make that recommendation to us, they're negotiating and trying to make the best decision on behalf of the county. And so when they come up with, if they come up with a decision that's for 4%, that's going through the rigorous process of trying to go through it to make sure that it's best for the county. And I've always been a big fan of let's get the property in compliance, specifically for homestead properties. And it's just that it's not an easy process to just say, you know what, let's make it all 15%. And because it doesn't work that way, because if we decide to have let's say you had a code enforcement board, the owners of the property would come in front and argue and work with and hear, hear from, the board would make that decision. But right now, this is staff, and it's a tough process, but they do try their best.
I think the overall concern is that we want compliance. We're not necessarily trying to make money on this, and I understand that. But again, I think this particular situation, which was a consent item, so it was not something that was really contentious, but I think these items wind up in front of us as someone's trying to sell the property. And all of a sudden, they've been ignoring us, and all of a sudden they wake up to the fact, if I want to sell this property, I got to do something to get rid of this lien. And I'm just...
Right. And that's why Sherry brought up, we look at the HUD statements to see actually how much are they making, and that goes into factoring, what we come up with a settlement. So we are being a little bit proactive with this, because typically what happens when people get these fines, they get the notices and they forget about it. And that's why you see 5, 10, 15 years go by, because they've just forgotten about it. So we're going to start implementing where every maybe 6 months or a year, to the properties that are still in violation, we'll just send them a friendly reminder, FYI, you're still in violation, please take care of it, because you're still gathering fines. And hopefully that will stop some of this. The same goes with the building department. We're going to try to set up an automated process where when your permit's getting ready to expire, you do get not just the notice from the building department, but you potentially get a notice from code saying, you may be in violation, please take care of this. And hopefully that will do some more for the voluntary compliance, some more communication type things.
Okay. Commissioner McKinley?
Thank you. I'm a comment first before I ask my questions. Mr. Rutter, you were very kind and gracious in your words about last night's event. I got to tell you, it was a little annoying to find out that one had already occurred, and then to find out that this one was occurring so late in the game. I've always had a pretty good working relationship with Representative Roth, and so to not have any contact with him whatsoever to hear about the issues and what we were doing to address them was disturbing. To not even have the knowledge, and it talked about the truck parking in the acreage. I actually didn't speak last night, but to not even have the knowledge that we've already directed staff to take a look at that and to work with the Indian Trail Improvement District and trying to come up with some sort of creative, very targeted overlay to help out some of the families that are working through those issues in the acreage. He had no knowledge of that because he never bothered to call and ask. And there were only 3 people who had the courage to stand up last night and talk about the situation within Heritage Farms. And one of them, he suggested to me after, he said he was surprised to learn she had a heart. And, you know, the whole feeling in that meeting last night was that this Board of County Commissioners is anti-Palm Beach County agriculture. Nothing could be further from the truth. This board has always supported agriculture, whether it was in the ag reserve, whether it's, you know, growers in the acreage, and of course the growers within the Everglades agricultural area. We have done everything we can to protect our second leading industry in Palm Beach County. And to make it, to have Representative Roth make this an argument that we don't care about nursery growers could not be further from the truth. This was never an argument about nursery growers. Any nursery grower that wants to come in and grow trees and plants and house plants and other landscaping materials within the Heritage Farms community, those neighbors would welcome them in there. The argument was about allowing a commercial operation to occur within a residential or otherwise agricultural neighborhood on a private road that was only one way in and one way out. And the constant commercial traffic from those landscape services was destroying the infrastructure and making those streets that have no sidewalks, no bike lanes, nothing else, because they're private roads, unsafe for the children and for the equestrian riders in that community. That was the issue. And this board, during the recession and then during all of the arguments that we've heard over the years about how the nursery industry is struggling, you know, to keep afloat, how we hear from all of the growers in the ag reserve who say, I need to sell my land because I can't make money anymore on nursery operations. And then you've got these these growers in, are these landscape service companies in Heritage Farms saying they can't find any land to grow their trees. It's like, anyway, it was a mixed argument. It was very frustrating. But we made concessions when we heard those arguments that the nursery growers were struggling. We made those concessions to say a certain percentage to help your nursery stay afloat. We were willing to say a very small percentage of your property could be used to do an ancillary landscape services company to benefit the nursery to help you stay afloat. And that was a great move on behalf of this county commission. We still have that. We've made all sorts of recommendations. That former Commissioner Mary Lou Berger started that the whole conversation to look at these revisions. And what happened over the years is those landscape service companies got a little greedy and they started expanding the operation and pushing out the nursery operation. And that was never the intent. They do not pay any commercial taxes on that property, even though they're running those properties as a commercial operation. And Representative Roth never called, never tried to go sit down and meet with those homeowners in Heritage Farms, never even had those conversations. And what we should all be aware of is the threat he made to work with the legislature and possibly explore doing a preemption or something that would classify landscape service companies as a bona fide agricultural operation. And that will have rippling effects across the state of Florida and a lot of residential communities, particularly those residential communities that have a rural flair. And so it was a very frustrating meeting last night, and I asked him afterwards to have a conversation with me, and I think Mr. Von Laren's office is working on trying to set that up. Sorry to vent on that one for a minute. I'm going to ask my questions now. The unpermitted structures was an issue. That also came up a lot last night. You brought it up in your presentation. Sort of the comments I heard last night, well, when I sold my house, or when I bought my house, my realtor said, my realtor said. Is there no ethical obligation on behalf of a realtor to make sure that they inform the buyer of a house that the structures on the property are properly permitted or not properly permitted?
Moral responsibility, yes. Legal, I'm not sure. We do have code officers that started reaching out to realtors, specifically Heritage Farms. We want the realtors to know what's allowed, what's not allowed in the areas that they're selling properties. Personal experience, they want to sell the property. They want to make commission. They're going to tell prospective buyers whatever they want to hear to make that transaction. And ultimately, it's sad to say, it's caveat emptor. You buy a used house, you buy a used piece of equipment, you buy a used car. Ultimately, the buyer is responsible for any deficiencies.
But we do have a service where you can come in fairly cheaply, and I think if we get directed by the board from this, maybe get with the Realtors Association of Palm Beach County and give them some brochures and let them know there is this service where they can call and find out what's permitted, what's expired, what's not permitted. Also, there's this belief that when they get a survey and they see something on the survey, they think it's been permitted. The survey just shows you what's there, permitted or not. So sometimes they flash the survey in and say, look, it's there, it must be permitted, and that's not entirely true. But we can put something together and get with the Realtors Association to make sure that they're aware. But as Rick said, it's kind of interesting how it works, because we'll get calls from realtors because they're selling the house at the end of the street, so they'll turn everyone in on that street because they want it to look nice to help their sale. And then we also get realtors that just potentially bend it a little bit to make the sale. But the Heritage Farms is kind of classic, and that's why we've had Rick reach out to the realtors in there to let them know, even though you see some of the stuff, it's not allowed.
Right, and the whole land use conversation and following the rules on that is a separate conversation. I'm talking about the fences and the sheds and the pool cages and that sort of thing. I mean, wouldn't it be easier to just require that there be a box on the disclosure checklist that says all structures are properly permitted? Yes, no, and if it's no, what ones are not properly permitted?
I think the buyer is also subject to that potentially, but I'll have to get with legal and see if there's anything we can do regarding some sort of checklist or contract. I can't necessarily dictate what someone buys or doesn't buy, or what contract they want to sign or not sign, but maybe through Sharon's office we can come up with.
Well, I'm not suggesting we do it just by Palm Beach County. I think that should be something that's done statewide, so maybe that's something that Representative Roth could help us with.
Or, title insurance. Most people don't read their title insurance, but that's an avenue to go through. But I don't know, what policy people may or may not have and what's exempted and not exempted, but that is an avenue someone could pursue. If they bought a property, got title insurance, and found out title was clouded because of potential illegal structures.
And we get phone calls every day from potential homeowners that will call us, and we can simply look on our computer and say, well, sir, we have a permit for your house, we have a permit for a fence, we have a permit for a shed, so if there's anything else on that property, it's most likely not permitted. And we can do that quickly, and we do get phone calls like that, but not everybody knows to call us before they purchase a property.
But maybe we can do some more outreach through Channel 20 and Public Affairs and kind of put that out there so people know to call us more and get with the Realtors Association so they know that. I think it's just an education.
All right, I think there's some room for conversation there to help. And then the lien is on the property for 20 years. What happens after 20 years?
It disappears. it disappears, then we can go and recite.
Okay. The issues that I've had out in the Glades in particular with some of the apartment complexes, the Joe Louis Apartments had accumulated $350,000 worth of code enforcement violations or fines before it even got onto my radar. Once it got on my radar, we moved swiftly, thanks to your team and to Shannon's team, to get that building condemned and get those residents out of there. How does it get to $350,000 before you start calling it a life safety issue or taking these additional steps? Knowing that people are living in there with those existing violations, I've always been a little frustrated on how it lasted so long.
So a lot of cases, specifically like this case, we're called out there for exterior issues, parking, trash. Very rarely are we invited inside to actually see how the residents are living. We don't see that a lot of times because they don't want us in there, whether they're embarrassed, they're afraid of getting evicted by their landlord. So we have a lot of trouble getting inside a lot of these places, so in the past, we'll address things that we can see, things that we can legally see. And in this specific case recently, we were allowed into the units, everybody was like, come see mine. So that's how it kind of bubbled up and we were able to identify the life safety issues.
But also, it's just a vast quantity of properties. Each code officer has 6,500 properties that they're responsible for. We just cannot monitor all of them all the time. So that's just one of the physical impossibilities that we face.
Could you put some sort of little trigger system into your staff or into your computer programming where you maybe alert the district commissioner of some of the problem issues you might be having? Because I was able to work with my team and get some of those doors open for you and some other properties. So perhaps if we were alerted to some of the problem child properties, it would be helpful to both of us.
Okay. Yeah, we'll convene and figure out what kind of dollar amount or what kind of gravity of violation triggers that event to let each district commissioner know what's going on.
Okay, and then when you've got a property in serious violation and health safety risks like we've had, you have to condemn those properties. You have to shut them down, turn off the power, turn off the water, and relocate the residents. And I think I know the answer to this question. I'm going to ask it out loud anyway. What responsibility does the property owner have to help financially assist the residents that have to be relocated? Is there any mechanism right now for us to charge those costs back to the property owner?
That would be, I don't believe so. It would be more of a legal question and what's contained in the lease, and I don't know.
I don't know of anything through the code enforcement process. So the code enforcement process allows us to impose fines for the violation, but there aren't any fines, other additional financial remedies that would require the landlord to find temporary homes for people.
We can talk more with legal and the real estate department because there might be something in there.
I'm looking down at my colleagues who will be here after I'm gone in 4 months, and I'm putting together a legislative agenda for you in case you're not noticing. Because I do think that the property owner created the situation. They should help offset some of the costs of having to relocate their residents. It's disgusting that they're not charged with that. And I think that part of the code enforcement lien should, and the magistrate makes their decision. The landlord should be forced to have to go and live in their property for a certain period of time so they can see what they did to the residents that they were taking money from.
Right. Well, it brings up kind of to go with Commissioner Weinroth, steps taken to come into compliance and gravity of the violation. I think your example is the classic one where I potentially don't see a reason to reduce any of the fines because the gravity was severe and nothing was done except collecting money from poor tenants.
And while there was no part to take advantage of the forgiveness program, no effort to come into compliance until we had to relocate. We emptied the building for her and we got it all, that everything is ready for demolition for her. She didn't have to pay for any of that so far. and that's disgusting. It's disgusting. There should be criminal penalties for that as well. I think the legislature really should take action. And I appreciate the timeline that you've laid out here. Obviously, this property, $350,000 worth of fines before February, so it'd been going through the system probably for what, a year, 2 years? Plus, you know, everything that's happened since then, since February, and we're still one appeal after the next appeal, still waiting to try to get this dilapidated structure demolished. And I think that the system allows for too much time to pass before we can take serious action, and that needs to be fixed. And I just want to congratulate you. I don't think, you know, when you run those numbers, 10,883 violations issued, and those that actually got referred to collections, was only 1.44%. That's pretty incredible. So thank you for your good work. And you know, you got beat up last night. Yeah, there's some frustrating things. And you know, and we've all up here shared our frustrations with you, like, oh, come on, guys, this has got to be made a little bit easier. And there's certainly room for improvement. Part of that improvement might be consolidating some of our land use codes so it's not this thick, it's a little smaller. That whole process, I think, could be cleaned up and made more efficient.
Right.
But the bulk of the work that you do is pretty phenomenal, and you are keeping people safe, and I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. And on the code aspect, Lisa is working on thinning it to make it a little bit easier. And last night, obviously, there's two sides to every story, so when we meet again, we'll give the other side of the story.
Right. Thank you.
Only two sides?
Or maybe five sometimes, I don't
There you
know.
go. Administrator, did you have anything you want to add? No? Okay. On disclosures, I think we do need to reach out to the realtors and find out. I mean, I know when I've sold property, they give me a whole sheet of disclosures I have to make about, you know, leaks and problems with the roof and problems with this and problems with that. And I don't know if that's just because I'm using a licensed realtor or whether that's a requirement for a transaction in Palm Beach County. So I think we need to reach out to Matthew Ledger and find out exactly what is the requirement and make sure those disclosures are there. Okay, Commissioner Marino, you are up.
Thank you. Yes, actually, the Realtor's disclosure, I just pulled it up, being a Realtor myself. There are several pages here. It's a 5-page disclosure, and the problem is where it says claims and assessments, are you aware of any existing pending or proposed legal or administrative action? You know, if the seller isn't being honest. So I don't want to put the onus on the Realtors. I would say, you know, the greatest proportion of your realtors are doing the job as they're supposed to. And it does boil down to the homeowner if they want to sell fast enough or whatnot. They may not be answering as they're supposed to. Also, with the advent of people paying cash versus financing, there's a little bit less in the exploring what's going on. And then the title searches, oftentimes they miss the fact that there are liens out there. But as the mayor said, we should talk with Matthew, who is the legislative person, and the Board of Realtors, because we have to do continuing education, and one of those things might be being more knowledgeable of what the process is in the county if there are code enforcements or lien violations of that nature. So us working with the Realtors Association is something that we need to do, and just start here in the county. You know, the rest of the state, we all have to do the same education, so we start here. It probably will get up to the state. With code violations, I know that in the city, oftentimes code violations led to folks that were getting CDBG grants because they actually couldn't pay for the violations because they were maybe on a fixed income or something like that. And I noticed that wasn't something we talked about at all here, because these are basically people that are just in violation. And I think a lot of these people are thumbing their noses at us. As the mayor said, you know, it was on consent on last Tuesday. I apologize for not being at the meeting. As I said, I was at the Mayo Clinic with my mom, and again with the Mayo Clinic this morning. But if people think that they can, you know, skirt the issue for years and years and years and then get a small settlement, they're going to. And in the case of the one that was settled last week, they actually had code violations going back to 1999. And this wasn't even a homesteaded property, this was a rental property. And I know you're all doing your job at the best of your ability, but, and I don't question that. I know how hard you work, and, you know, with the amount of code violations that you all have to cover with 6,500, you know, what is it, 6,500
Per code
houses per
Properties per code
properties
officer,
per
roughly.
inspector. You know, that's a lot, and normally you find out about the violations because somebody is calling you, or an inspector is out looking at one house and he notices another house somewhere else. But as for going back to the CDBG grants, we are helping with that, aren't we? Where if somebody is in violation and say they're on a fixed income and, you know, their roof is leaking and they can't afford to fix it, are we making them aware that there might be a process to help them?
So we
I'm not going to talk about case.
we
We're not
let
talking
OCR
case.
know. OCR know, and then Jonathan Brown's group knows well, and Patrick could probably weigh in on more on that.
I was just going to say, there are a number of resources available. Right person, right situation, absolutely make them aware of other opportunities to make the corrections necessary.
Because I'm guessing that, you know, people that, it's kind of like gates keep out the truthful people. They don't keep out the, so I'm hoping, because I'm an optimist, that the majority of people that are in violation are going to bring it into compliance. And what do you figure is your turnaround for people to bring something into compliance?
It just depends. Every case is totally different. If Rick's working again with Mrs. Jones and she's on a fixed income and she can't afford, and she tells him, I need more time, I'm on a fixed income, she's going to be given more time. I mean, we're going to be reasonable. There's no point hammering her if she's not able to do it. So it really just depends. I mean, we really work with them, and if they ask, I don't think I've ever denied an extension myself if someone's given me a legitimate reason. Sometimes it's a simple reason. My lawnmower broke. It's getting fixed next week. Can you extend it another week? It just really depends.
And the one last thing, thank you, by the way. The one last thing is, I know a lot of times we talk about the property appraiser. So it would seem to me, and I apologize up front if you're already doing it, but it would seem to me that the property appraiser needs to come in the beginning, not in the middle or the end. And maybe there's an opportunity for us to sit down with the property appraiser and, you know, talk with her about our land codes. And I know we have several properties up in Jupiter Farms that, you know, they were approved. I mean, they got certified through the property appraiser, but not, it seems like the step was in reverse.
Right. So that you're totally correct. That's something that we do need to work on. We do work on turning in the illegal homesteads and the illegal ag classifications. So we do work on that with them. But I think, like to your point, there's more needed. So we will definitely get together with county administration and Patrick and set up something and kind of go through the process so we can all be on the same page.
I think so. Thank you very much.
Ms. Baker?
We actually do work with not only the property appraiser, but the tax collector as well. So when we find people are in violation, such as ag land doing commercial uses on it, we turn that over to the tax collector, and then her staff follows up on those particular issues. We can always do more, and so we will just refresh if we haven't done it in a while. We'll sit down with both the tax collector and the property appraiser to ensure that our procedures are in compliance with making them aware of issues we believe under their purview, to make sure that people are, if they're renting out property that's showing homesteaded, that we turn that over to them, make sure we are providing them with the appropriate information as we turn the case to them, and definitely with the tax collector, because she does go after people that are not adhering to the law that we turn in.
Thank you. Commissioner Sachs, you're recognized.
This has really been a good discussion, and before I go on to my point, I'd like to nominate Commissioner McKinley for the state legislature so we can get some of these issues passed in the law. It is to the interest of the county to make sure that we interface with the tax collector, the property appraiser, state attorney, whatever, the Realtors Association, because We need to make sure that what you have done as a unit is a matter of public record. Because if a person, and I don't know real estate law, I'm an attorney, but I never wanted to practice real estate law, and I don't want to now. But I'm looking at Shannon, if our county attorney's office could review how we can document these issues that code enforcement works so hard on surveys. Are they required when you pass title to property that a survey is given to the new seller, to the buyer? And does that survey reflect what the county will allow people to have on their property? I know in Horseshoe Acres, which is residential, we are being marketed as commercial so that people can come in and start businesses. But when people buy, do they know? Do they have notice that this particular property that they're buying has these restrictions and/or code violations? That's something that I'd like to see us to pursue it, to see, because it's a county interest that we take care of our property. This is what we are required to do as a county government. And second, on these forgiveness of violation, of fine violations, do we at least receive costs that county employees went out and staff? And I know, Ramsey, you're always out there in the field. All of you are. Can we recover the minimum, our costs, when we go to forgive these fines that we have imposed? Patrick, do you know if that's a mandatory part of forgiveness?
It's not something we've ever looked into. Certainly, it's not a practice we employ now. It's not something that I'm familiar with us looking into, but if it's a direction, we can look at what the mechanisms might be to do some measure of recovery on those options.
Absolutely. When somebody is prosecuted in a court of law, criminally, costs of prosecution are always imposed. And if a person can't pay, then they have time to pay it, but they're always imposed. These, we're financed by county taxpayers, and it costs to send our people out. And when we forgive, we should at least have some designation of the costs that it costs county taxpayers to finance what you all do as a unit. Those must be mandated. Ramsey, you have something to say, I can tell.
Where we do a fine modification, we do collect the costs, and the costs are typically the certified mail and the mileage and copies and pictures. We don't do the hours spent per office, staff time. We don't do that.
Can we?
We'll look at Shannon. Some municipalities do, and they've gotten in some trouble.
Shannon, what?
I don't think that we can do that, and there's case law out there. So we do impose costs such as for copying, for mileage.
But Shannon, can we look and see at the law to see if costs of prosecution for our claims includes our actual costs?
Sure, we can look into
I would
that.
appreciate that, because it may be, and that's important, because I know many times our people go out there over and over and over again, and that should be the minimum mandatory that these violators should pay. Other than that, we can review forgiveness, but that should be the minimum mandatory. And if that can be included within costs, I'd appreciate it. And thirdly, I just want to thank you, because you've been out so many times in the Ag Reserve, and I know I'm going to see a lot more of you out there when it comes to violations. And I appreciate so much of what you do, and you're wonderful, and I appreciate so much of you. Thank you. I'm going to try to make your lives a little bit easier if I can, with some of the different zoning variations that we're working on, to make it a little clearer, also for the people to know exactly where they can park their trucks, where they can have the landscape contractors, operations. We're working on that right now, but I do appreciate all you do. Thank you.
All right. And with that, one of the items we're looking at, and we'd like some board direction, is, we do have some of these property owners, not homesteaded properties, but these commercial properties owners that do thumb their nose at us, and they just keep on going. And we would like, if it's the board gives us direction to start working with the county attorney's office and OFMB to pursue some foreclosures on some of these illegal commercial businesses that are out there.
Well, criminal prosecution is something I have a background in. May not be real estate, but I would really like to examine that a little further, because what is going on, particularly along the Turnpike and the Ag Reserve on the west side of the Turnpike, is to me is criminal. And so whatever we can do, and I'm looking at Sharon, whatever you can suggest for us to impose penalties, I would love to work with you all, and I'm sure my colleagues would like to look at it as well. Thank you, Ramsey. That's very true.
Thank you, Commissioner. Vice Mayor?
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation this morning. I just, a couple things. First off, I want to really thank your staff for, their ability to deal with some of these very difficult situations. And as you say, many of them, I mean, they're individual. There's a lot of different reasons. Some are certainly unintentional, and people, once made aware, really try and get things into compliance. The situation out in Century Village in West Palm Beach, and appreciate the time in informing the folks there and helping people understand, the implications of hiring unlicensed contractors and people not pulling permits, and the real damage not only to the unit that they're working on, but the potential damage to the rest of the building, and unfortunately causing people to lose their homes, at least until either the building can be repaired properly, or in some cases may even require demolishment of the entire building if it can't be repaired. So that's, so I thank you taking the time, and I had really good feedback on how your meeting went in informing the residents. A couple of things that I noticed in your presentation. About 20% of the violations, or 20% of your calls, result in no violation being noticed or issued. And was curious if there may be something, and I'm not sure from a perspective on how we might help reduce that number, so not so many people, you folks have to go out and investigate something that's not a violation. I know sometimes we try and explain to people that, people have certain property rights. Not everything results to a violation. Are there thoughts on that?
So we've tried to get together with some of the large organizations like Cobra and some of the bigger HOAs to kind of let them know what we can and cannot do, and that's helped. But it's helped reduce because they're not calling in violations that we can't take action on. So that's one thing that we have done. We can probably do some more. But I think it's just a public outreach, and maybe get with Public Affairs and Channel 20, and we can start broadcasting some of this out there. What tends to happen is a lot of people in one certain area of the county is used to a certain lifestyle, even though the code doesn't necessarily permit that, and then another area of the county with the exact same code is just different, and therein lies the problems.
I'm sure you may have tracked this. Is there a type of call that you get that's more prevalent, that's not a violation, or?
We can certainly.
Something we might help educate the public on, where if they're seeing something that they can think is a violation.
We can certainly run a report on unfounded calls and see what pops up.
Can save you 20% of the not having to go out and see that,
Yeah, we do run into a difficult situation, whereas, noise violations, someone's pool pump on a zero-lot line is making noise. To them it's a problem. To us, it's not a problem because it doesn't meet the threshold to trigger a violation. So those are some of the things, but we can certainly look at it and see what comes up most common, and maybe do some outreach on those types of things.
And similarly with the 13% that end up going to special magistrate, I can't imagine what else could be done to try and help those folks not have to go down that path. But if there is anything, and if you have any thoughts on that, I certainly want to hear that.
To be quite honest, we do everything and anything we can to get them. Some people just don't want to, and even if they go to the special magistrate, they're still given more time to come into compliance, and then even once we file a lien, they have another hearing to get the third, fourth, fifth bite at the apple before we
And a lot of those people, they don't think they're in violation. They want to come contest what we had cited them for. So people like that, you're always going to have, so I don't know how to really reduce that. We give people a lot of time. We work with them, we call them, we help them, we assist them, we refer them. So we do the best we can to get that number as low as possible, because that's something we're proud of.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much, and please send my gratitude back to folks out in the field and people in your office. Much appreciated.
Will do.
Commissioner McKinley, you want to finish this up?
Yeah, I just wanted a clarification. I used the word greedy before, and it was not appropriate, and I don't like to broad brush things like that. So I would just say that they were providers that outgrew the landscape services portion of the property that they were allowed to operate on and decided not to relocate at that time. Just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. Well, clearly, this is a subject that's near and dear to our hearts up here. I would say half the phone calls I get are either from people who are complaining that code enforcement's bothering them, or complaining that code enforcement's not doing something about the neighbor next door. So we certainly appreciate all you put yourselves through. And, since the pandemic, obviously, this has been an area that we've really focused on, and we thank you for everything you do. All right, I think we have beaten this horse up as much as we need to. We are at 5 minutes to 12. We are going to recess until 2 o'clock, when we're going to come back and have an extraordinary conversation about extraordinary circumstances. We'll see you at 2.